Test 1, 2. That sound all right?
Yep.
If you'll give me a minute, I'll read these 20 chapters real fast.
All right, guys, welcome back. Pastor Eyes, we're picking up in Genesis chapter 24, and we're going to hit about 3,000 chapters today and try to finish the book.
I think they must still be writing Genesis. I can't quite get it into this thing.
Yeah, we left off with the death of Sarah, and so it picks up with Isaac and Rebekah and how they come together. So anyway, so I'm throwing it to you guys. What should we highlight here?
Well, I'll tell you what
25
jumped
chapters?
off at me as far as chapter 24 is concerned. Whenever he sends Eliezer, we assume that's who it is, pretty confident, to find a wife for Sarah, is that here's a man that has been living in Abraham's house for ever how many years, so much so that Abraham thinks this is going to be his heir, right? This is somebody that's really close to him. And it's remarkable that we find a similar faith in Eliezer as Abraham. Something that I continue to come back to, that if we will live genuine before God, then those around us will be affected. And I've seen it in a lot of different lives, contemporary, but also you continue to come back to it in Scripture too. So here's Eliezer relying on God, trusting God, reaching out to God for help in time of need, and to take care of things for the benefit of other people. And so some beautiful prayers in here that he's praying, and the faith that he's demonstrating.
One of the things that caught my eye within this is when he is praying, he's basically asking for a sign like we all do.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's like, if it happens like this and happens like that, then I know that this is the one. And that's what we would like to. I'm sure there's plenty of young people out there that are praying very similar prayers. God,
Yeah.
please, when I go into this place, let this person be wearing a red hat.
Yeah, when I walk into Food Lion, my wife will be getting milk.
Yeah.
Please, Lord.
There she is. Not to mention,
It happened just like you said.
Go in there and stand for 5 hours a day. There she is.
Wow, nobody's getting milk today.
But anyway, and I don't know that there's anything wrong with it. Sometimes we'd say,
Yeah.
well, there's maybe a little less faith involved in that practice, but we still do it to the degree that we say, God, close the door, open the door. It's the same thing. We're putting the ball in God's court and say, hey, God, I need you to be the one to do this, not me, because we don't trust ourselves. I think there's a major faith involved in that reality. It's like, hey, he doesn't trust himself to go pick this person for his Isaac's future wife. It's a big decision. I mean, that's a big deal stuff. And so he wants God to be the one to pick, not him. And so there's something beautiful in that.
Yeah.
I think it's good. I want to piggyback off of that for a second, because it came up in my small group that did Abraham's whole household actually have faith? Did they just watch this man, trusting God, and they were kind of like, all right, well, we're not going to have anything to do with that. And no, I believed that they did. And it came up because, he circumcised his entire household basically.
Yeah.
And they're like, did they go along with that willingly? And I believe they did. I mean, they watched this man commune with God, and now they have complete faith. Yeah, I don't think it's any different here, and I think it'll just continue to pass down as we get into these future generations.
100% agree. And you think of all the mountaintop experiences that Abraham has had, and those people with him too. To the point of God's protection, supernatural protection, His supernatural provision. Abraham is filthy rich to the point where kings are afraid of him.
Yeah.
Not only that, he's defeated kings. So at some point along the way, it's like this. There's something definite about this individual, and they get a chance to witness his relationship with God. And plus, I come back, and after God answers the prayer and he finds the woman, then look at verse 26 of chapter 24. He worships. I love that. It's not like, okay, next thing. And it's like, no, let's circle back. Let's give God a little glory here.
Yeah, well, in verse 12, he's saying, O Lord God of my master Abraham. And I was wondering about that too, in terms of, so is this a impersonal prayer? Okay, this is the God of my master, and so I'm going to appeal to how this God has blessed my master. And so it's kind of like, since Abraham seems to be blessed, then I'm going to approach him in that way. And the worship later on definitely makes it at least more personal, at least at that point.
Well, I don't know that it's impersonal before. It's a lot of throughout the Old Testament, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,
Yes.
right? It's a singling out because there's all these gods. We're specifying that this is the person we're talking about. And so it's not just a God. This is the God that Abraham worships.
And I think that's important too, just for the fact that I think we don't really realize just how much idolatry is going on.
Right.
When you've got Rachel going back and saying, okay, well, let me grab these household gods.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait.
Yeah.
So they've got the God that has given a covenant, and they're seeing their whole lives play out because God is called. And yet she's like, let me grab these household gods.
Yeah. Well, and even Jacob later says, hey, let's get rid of all these gods we got around here.
Yep.
Let's bury these guys.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot going on,
Yep.
behind the scenes, and trying to basically figure out their culture too. how much are they carrying other gods along with the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob? A lot of things happening. Rebecca, comes back, of course, and she's willing, so they don't delay, that type of idea. And they come back. We get to chapter 25, Abraham's death, and we list all the descendants of Abraham.
We're just going to glaze over the fact that this was an arranged marriage, and Isaac didn't have a say in it. And basically, I'm going to get you somebody. Stand still. I'll be back in a little bit.
Yeah.
I would glaze past that faster than I would glaze past all the incest.
I mean,
It's, we're going to go find you a cousin.
Rebecca had a choice whether she wanted to
She
stay or
did.
go.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
she trusted the Lord to
Yep.
go.
Yep. I think it's a beautiful story. It's placing your faith. All of them had faith in something greater than themselves.
Yeah, and
So-
there's even a blessing pronounced in verse 60 over Rebecca saying that, our sister, may you become thousands and 10,000 offspring, possess the gate of those who hate him. So, chapter 25.
Again, Abraham was too old to have kids at 100, but Sarah dies, and this guy just goes on a tear, don't he? He gets him another one. But he did. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 more kids that we're aware of. It was
Well,
like-
and it begs the question, as far as we see this throughout Genesis and the rest of the Old Testament for that matter, but God's laws concerning marriage and, especially monogamy as opposed to polygamy. And we see a lot of polygamy within the Old Testament. And it doesn't seem like God is so opposed to it in terms of just like how he addresses it. And so mostly what I'm thinking of is like when it comes to, what was it, Tamar and,
we're
I
at
don't know,
the
we'll get there.
11-minute and 50-second mark, just so we can reference
Yeah.
back to Tiana here in a little bit.
You got to understand where we're going with this, because so at some point there's got to be, obviously same thing with incest. Like we look back on these things and we would never preach that. We would never preach polygamy. We would never preach incest and all that. And so at some point, God, he's not at least condemning and judging based on those actions is kind of what I'm saying. And so when it comes to, I think with Tamar and the sin of Onan and all that, then it seems like God is like, no, he's looking more at the wrongness of what Judah did and not giving Shelah. I mean, this is going way past, but so it seems like he's focusing on that and counting that as bad and sinful and disgraceful and all that Onan would not give Tamar children. And so he was holding back. And so that seems the greater grievous thing than it was to even have this polygamous relationship, to say that, he was now going to, Tamar. You could maybe assume that maybe he didn't have a wife at that time, but probably already did and had a child. I don't remember if it was explicit in that or not.
So,
But-
it doesn't say, right?
Yeah. So this is jumping way forward, of course, but my mind just goes to when we look at all this and Abraham's got, this wife and that wife, and you've got concubines that are coming into the picture and servants and all that it's like, what did God tell them? Because obviously the law at this point is oral and just passed down, and what he made most important, if you will.
Well, so Sarah's dead, so him taking another wife, I think, is completely within all the
Yeah.
framework of what God calls acceptable.
Yeah.
So with his situation, not so much of an argument for polygamy or incest necessarily, but I guess Sarah was his half sister, so we're not going to talk about that. But I definitely see it in some others, and I think it gets worse as we move forward.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you've got generations back and forth as well. I mean, it's not just like sister, cousin, half sister, whatever. It's generations going back and forth too.
Abraham lived 175 years. Remarkable. Ishmael lived 137 years, also remarkable. And
And then we get to Isaac.
and then we get to Isaac.
Yeah.
Rebecca gets pregnant.
It's
You get
twins.
Twins. One of them's pretty hairy.
Yeah. So the name Esau comes from Edom and Seir, which Edom means red, Seir means hairy.
Yeah.
And I guess if you put those together, you get Esau.
That's right. And the cover, it says in verse 25, came out reddish all over like a hairy garment. Listen, there was no way to say he's just ugly, but it's just described it.
Yeah.
And it makes me just wonder, yeah, I guess he would be a man that would go and hunt.
Yeah.
He's not staying at home.
Be careful not to get hunted, right?
He's got the natural camo.
Yeah, sure. would. I was like, no, it's not cold out.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
Anyway.
Jacob came out holding onto the heel of Esau. And the name Jacob is a play on the Hebrew word for heel. And later on, Esau uses that as like a play on the word tripped up. Like, surely you are a heel because you have tripped me up. And so now we kind of use Jacob as like a
the supplanter.
Yeah, like it's like this deceiving name. But yeah, originally, like it just was, this guy, he's red, he's a heel. Red and hairy, sorry.
Red and Harry.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
Red and
we're
Harry.
coming back to Harry here in a little bit.
Yep. What about the selling of the birthright? This is interesting to me.
It is.
Well, so before we jump into that, I do want to just mention that, it was told to Rebecca before, when she's got some issues, then the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples from within you will be divided. One is going to be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And I think that that's important because that will come back up, later on in the conniving that they
It
all
definitely
go around.
affected her thought
So,
process.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any of it right.
Correct.
I wrote down subtle foreshadowing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so subtle.
No.
Yeah,
so
so-
the birthright usually goes to the older one. This would be the initial larger portion. He would
Yeah.
take care of on the household stuff. He would be kind of like the owner, the new owner,
Yep.
right? After the dad passes away. And Jacob wanted to be that one. And which, they're twins, and so it's not like there's an older or younger. I mean, yes,
Yeah,
2
minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah, right. And so
Yeah, if that.
If
'cause-
that, right.
Yeah.
Head on his heel, it was seconds perhaps. And so you could see perhaps even better how one would feel like they're just as entitled as the other, but still, order is order.
Well, and you got to wonder when it plays into, like, when we let our minds wander and Esau is described as a hairy dude and that he's a hunter and Jacob kind of stays at home with mom and everything, then we just go to the stereotypes.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of plays it up too. Jacob's like, yeah, of course he's going to try to play his smarts because he doesn't have brawn. That's what we're thinking. So when it comes to brains and brawn, Jacob is going to pull out the brains and Esau's going to rely on his brawns. And so push come to shove, Esau's going to win. But, Jacob's like, okay, we'll figure this out. And so perhaps he was even waiting for an opportunity, but he definitely recognized it when he saw one with the birthright.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there is a birthright and a blessing, just for people who may not understand or see that yet. And so this is the time where he's getting the birthright, stealing the birthright from his brother Esau.
For some soup.
Yep. Of all things. I mean, he's at least being dramatic here. He's like, dude, I'm going to die if you don't give it to me. And even when he says, okay, give me the birthright and I'll give you some soup. And he's like, okay, well, what good is a birthright if I die? And so he's like, sure.
Yeah. It's an emotional decision.
Yeah. And you kind of wonder how smart Esau really is when it comes down to it.
They're probably way more intelligent than we are today. 26, we see a repeating of the covenant to Isaac, and he tells him again, all the nations of the earth will pronounce blessings on one another using the name of your descendants, which we know there's double fulfillment in that. They're going to use the name of Ephraim as a blessing on all of Israel, but also it's further on, we mentioned that, Merry Christmas. Eventually it's going to be bigger than Ephraim.
Yeah.
And that's where we kind of get into all the nations of the earth, because not all the nations of the earth would pronounce, blessings based on how well off Ephraim managed, but all the nations of the earth today are familiar with Christmas.
Yeah. But I would say, too, that one of the things that I noticed within all of this is just how many times God is basically revealing and saying, I'm going to be faithful to you. I'm going to make you into a great nation. Or, so not only is it seen in generations, but at times, especially we saw with Abraham, he repeated it over and over and over again and even clarified it at times, at least the way that it's recorded. And so that's happening, too, as the boys are born and it's passed down from generation to generation.
He, like his father before him, lied about his wife being his sister, so that he would be treated well or not killed for her sake, I guess. And
And this is a different Abimelech.
sure,
That I had to second guess. I was like, wait a minute, let me make sure. And Abimelech can be at least a generic name, sort of thing too.
Yeah, it means
like
my
position.
father is king.
Yeah, so it's kind of a positional thing at times.
I mean these Abimelechs can't get away from these Hebrews.
And there will be more. Yeah, for sure.
Like, why are they always lying to us?
But at least there's an awareness. I appreciate the fact that the Abimelech has some morality about him, and is careful not to violate something that he considers sacred. I mean, again, we keep coming back to the fact that everybody seems to care more about these marriages than Abraham and Isaac. It's like, come on, guys, get in the game. Covenant repeated again, verse 23 and 24.
And the response is building an altar and calling upon the name.
So then we get to chapter 27, and this is when Jacob really pulls out all the stops with the help of his mother to deceive his father. And, I have great problems with this. I mean, Rebecca, what in the world? Basically how I read this is like, why would you help your son deceive your husband. It's you've made a clear choice here on who you're favoring, and so it's she didn't just love Jacob more than Esau. She loved Jacob more than Isaac. Like, I'm not loving this. All of a sudden, I don't care so much for her.
So when I read this, all that thing that I can think about in my mind is what Paul writes in Romans 9, where he's like, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. And I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, this is weird and interesting. And why did you hate Esau? And, I start thinking about how, as God is choosing the people that carry on the promise, Abraham's firstborn was Ishmael. Abraham's secondborn was Isaac. Isaac's firstborn was Esau. Isaac's secondborn was Jacob. And then, as he's carrying down the promise through Jacob, it's not through Reuben, who is his firstborn.
Right.
It's through Judah.
Yeah.
And I think, he's not even first or second. He's fourth.
Yeah.
And so, I think God is just kind of showing us that it's by his grace and by his mercy, he chooses whom he chooses.
Yeah.
And so
Definitely shows off the sovereignty.
Yeah, right. God is in the midst of all of these details, even when it doesn't make sense.
Even with Joseph's kids, he puts Ephraim above Manasseh, which is out of order. And there's no good reason in the world.
Yeah.
Because God wanted to.
Yeah. So while what Rebecca did was probably wrong, and we look at it and
You're
be
lying,
like, that's probably
lying
sin.
is wrong. They're probably here.
And, I think about it too in the way that Joseph kind of sums up the whole chapter. What you meant for evil, God meant for good.
Yeah.
And so, what is evil, God is using for good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's probably some, at least in my mind, there's definitely some deception on both parents' parts, but clearly Rebecca, in listening to what was going on, and I guess perhaps the deception that I see is maybe there's an assumed that Jacob would have known some of the prophecy, maybe Rebecca shared it with him or something like that, and so maybe he's trying to strike ahead of time by making sure that before he dies that he blesses Esau and that Esau is the one to carry it on.
This is an instrumental situation, using the human instruments to help God.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and Esau was definitely his favorite, right? I mean, that seems to come through because he's like, dude, you make some good food. I mean, I want steak. I don't want plants or whatever. It's kind of the way I picture it.
Keep your broccoli.
And so he's like, go and get me, some wild game, prepare it in just the way that I like it. And so, I mean, it seems like you've got the two parents opposed to one another, and they both got their favorite kid. So it seems like there's deception on both parts. And yet, I can't help but think, yes, Rebecca did know the prophecy. And so even though it's taking matters into her own hands, it's we see again that these people are doing just that. It's like, yes, we see this supernatural or this divine appointment or blessing or different things like that, but we're going to try to make things happen. Either it's on our timetable or it's on our own ways or something like that. And that's where I feel like, this sounds familiar. To all of us.
Yeah. Well, and the fallout. I mean, you think you just can't think far enough ahead to realize, okay, well, what's the possible outcomes of this, and how could that possibly shake down, and where could this possibly? It's not like Esau ain't going to figure it out. I mean, you don't have to go too far to realize, hey, this plan is only going to be for a minute, because Esau's going to figure out. He's going to be upset. This is a given. There's no way Isaac's going to be upset, and he's going to figure it out. And now he knows that both his son and his wife had plotted against him. That's going to cause havoc in the relationship, the marriage relationship, the father-son relationship. I mean, there's just so much fallout. Whereas, how would God have done it differently? I don't think God was short on options, that he needed to utilize deception. I think he could have just made the thing happen however he wanted to.
Well, and the other thing, when I was talking to Tiana, actually, she brought up the fact that when Esau comes back in and there's nothing left. So Jacob, it seems like Jacob was intending to give Esau everything and not have anything.
Talking about Isaac?
Sorry. Yeah. And I knew I was going to mix these names up.
That's a lot of names to keep
keep me straight. Yeah, he wasn't planning on giving anything to Jacob in the blessing, because when Esau comes back, he's like, I got nothing for you. And Esau even comes back. He's like, are you sure there's nothing? And he's like, no, I got nothing. And it's almost like the blessing, quote unquote, that he gives to Esau is almost like an anti-blessing. It's like, well, since I've said that the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth is going to be to your brother, then now you're not going to have the dew of heaven, and you're not going to have the fatness of the earth. And, so you're going to serve others. It's definitely messed up, for sure. We see the family dysfunction. That's both comforting to us. These people are not any different than us, but at the same time, we should learn from them. Let's put it that way.
This is not how you do it.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Including, just for the record, including the polygamy.
You can't walk that back now. No. So there it is. Verse 41. First 4 words. Esau hated Jacob.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was already tension in that relationship. They didn't need all this, but you know, it is what it is now.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's so real and so true are these blessings that there's no turning it back.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Isaac could revoke it. It's like it's given, it's gone, it's done. It's there. You can't unring that bell.
Which is interesting in and of itself too. That's another question that I have as far as just, and I don't know if there's an answer, but why would God give so much power to these people in terms of blessing? You know, the way that it's recorded and the way that it appears from our perspective is that these people have the power. And it's like, so in our mind, it appears as though if Jacob had truly blessed Esau, then that's what would have happened. And of course, you know, I'm relying more on the sovereignty of God, and you know, this is how God has worked it, and it would have always been that way. Yeah. But at least it appears from our perspective that that's what would have happened, and that these people had the power to pronounce blessings and pronounce cursings.
Yep.
And God would follow through with it.
See it again further down in Jacob when he starts blessing his kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing the stuff he says.
Yeah.
It's
You're like, thanks, Dad.
That didn't feel like a blessing. Well, some of them had it coming though. Let's be honest.
Yeah, their names.
Right.
Yeah, Reuben's like, okay, you knew this was coming back up, didn't you? You didn't think that wasn't gonna come up.
But even with Judah, we'll get there. Even with Judah,
for
you're
sure.
like, wait, why didn't he get a bad one? So yeah, I mean, Esau there in 41, you mentioned it. He's planning on killing Jacob, and Rebecca finds out about it, and so she says, "You got to go. You got to leave. You got to be protected. So go to Laban."
And all of this conniving to get the blessing for her favored son, she's about to not see him for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, is that really what she anticipated happening?
Yeah.
Is this really working out now?
So that brings us into chapter 28, which is Jacob leaving.
Going to stay with Rebecca's brother, was it Laban?
Yep,
Yeah.
Laban.
Yep. Laban, also a pretty shrewd individual.
Oh, yeah.
So it's,
Absolutely.
Rebecca and Laban, they peas from the same pod. Yeah. I was like, listen, these people are tough, man. I was like,
And perhaps Jacob even learned some conniving from
yeah,
him.
Yeah,
he
that was- who knows?
got his come up.
He gets it honest.
Yeah. I was like, it'll be a tough family. Everybody has got some type of selfish ambition going on. Nobody's like on the surface trying to love each other. And it's like, ugh, like I cannot even with these people. And these are God's chosen. So that's
Right.
what we got. And it's we're able to look at them with disdain, and yet I'm sure we're all the same way.
Well, in the midst of all this, conniving and deceiving, right here in chapter 28, Jacob has a dream where he sees God, and God kind of reaffirms the covenant that he had been given, that his family had been given, Abraham, Isaac, and now him. And so, again, God's grace and mercy supersedes all the crazy stuff that we could do.
Yeah. It is amazing.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I keep going back to is just the mere fact that when God has chosen these people and chosen to use and work his plan through them and all that is what is for sure. That is what is solid. That is what is confirmed, as opposed to all these people that are like just all over the place. And so my mind kind of goes back to, when we rely on ourselves, we're double-minded and we're unstable. We're like a wave of the sea blown and tossed. But when we rely on God and when we are sure of the wisdom of God and we seek the wisdom of God and so on and so forth, then that is when we have stability, if you will, and understanding. So
I love the fact that God is still passing the covenant down to each generation, and each one a little less deserving than the one before.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it, because none of them deserved it, and that's the only way this works. It's like, well, this guy was bad. Yeah, they were all bad in different variations and different degrees. Yes, but it was never based on their ability or their righteousness, and so it's never by works of righteousness that we have done, but according to His mercy that He has given us a covenant.
yeah, definitely the themes that we ought to be seeing, understanding that the Bible is not just about these people. It's God's word about himself, revealing himself.
Yep. Jacob goes down there and meets somebody. Lo and behold, it's my cousin.
One of the things that we do,
she's hot.
maybe
They all know got me.
Sorry.
one of the things that I want to mention too is verse 22 of 28 before we move on a little bit later.
Okay.
So we see God initiating, people responding, and in this particular case, he's promising, Jacob is making a promise and he's going to fulfill it. Like, this is one of the things that Jacob actually carries through, and he actually keeps doing it. We see different times where he's offering sacrifices to God and stuff, but he says, God, I'm going to give you a tenth. So basically he's showing, just like we do with a tithe or offerings, that we're showing dependence and we're showing gratitude.
And this is how one of the ways we know that the tithe is not a law thing, because law hadn't happened yet. And people say, well, yeah, that was Old Testament. No, this is before the law. People were giving a tenth to God. It was just as an act of worship. It's not a legal thing. It's a worship thing.
And just be glad that we're not Egyptian, because we had to give a fifth. All right, so we're in 29. Yes, Rachel. He's like, she's a looker.
Yeah. Like, hubba.
So what about Leah being weak of eyes or something? What type of Hebrew idiom is that?
Cross-eyed.
I don't know.
Yeah, this says her eyes were tender. So I don't know. I feel like tender eyes sounds good.
My mind goes to maybe he saw it as a handicap, perhaps. Like maybe she was weak of eyes in idea of she couldn't see or something like that, maybe perhaps. But Rachel, I mean, she was a shepherdess too. You would think that back then, maybe, a woman that was a shepherdess and did sort of like the harder labor would not have been quite as appealing, but clearly she was.
I actually think if I was living back then, that's the people you'd look for.
Maybe.
I mean, it's you don't want a passenger princess in that day and age. You need somebody that can get a little bit dirty.
Yeah.
It's like, I know we're going to take care of animals and kids, but we might have to fight too. I need somebody that can do some things. I was like, make a muscle. Let me see what you got here.
Well, and I'm sure that does say something about her character too, and that's where my mind goes as far as she's willing, and perhaps it's just because maybe Laban doesn't have any boys, but Rachel, taking care of things and being able to work and help out, showing character.
It's a terrible story that he gets duped, and some of this we're thinking, how in the world did you not notice?
That's how drunk he was.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, that dude must have just been blackout drunk.
He was wasted.
We gotta at least think that, right? It doesn't say it, but it's like, man, really?
Did they look that much alike?
You're not going to lift that veil till the morning?
I don't know all the
It's-
customs.
I don't either. I'm not allowed to kiss her. I don't know what's going on here. This is just, I got so many questions about this that it bothers me bad. It was like, I believe I could have avoided this one. That's what I'm thinking. Whenever I read the story, I was like, I don't believe he could have caught me with that one. I was like,
And yet, in this case, it's kind of like I go back to the whole goat skin with Jacob, though. It's like, how in the world could Isaac have been duped by goat skin?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that a hairy son would be able, you'd be able to tell the difference between goat skin and your son's?
yeah, we glaze over that, but if a goat skin reminds you of your son, he might have a problem.
Well, and so in the same, I see it as the same thing. It's like, well, how did he get deceived into knowing that this was not Rachel? I mean, even in conversation, you would think that he would be able to tell her voice, right? I mean, he's worked 7 years.
It has to come back to inebriation.
Yeah,
it's
got to.
They had a party and he had too much to drink and woke up wrong one. That's probably a great story for some people. It's like, wait a minute, where'd you come from?
I read somewhere that it says that, he feasted, and basically the commentator was like, it better reads as he drank. Now, I don't know if they're trying to be funny or if that's literal, but
I don't know either. Nothing else makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, and Laban, when in 22, when he says he gathered together all the people in the place and made a feast, that he knew what he was doing, of course.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I think even if it's not insinuating the drinking within the feast,
How does
then
Rachel
he's
not
got
say
to
something?
know.
How does she just slip out and say, hey, that ain't me?
Yeah.
There's so many pieces of this that just don't fit. Anywho, we could spend the rest of the day and still be no further into it.
Yeah.
It happened. He's married to Leah. He's not happy. He complains to Laban. Laban says, it's the custom here. You got to marry the older one first. It's like, wait a minute. I don't believe I think you're making that up. Anyway, so he had to fulfill his week, and then he was given Rachel, but he still had to work another 7 years. So Laban,
Yeah.
again, shrewd.
yeah.
This guy, he's getting 14 years of labor basically for free now.
Right.
Well, and he was prospering under him too.
Yep.
So
And he's lost nothing. His girls are still there.
yeah,
It's not like he took them and left. It's like, okay, he's really brilliant, like wickedly brilliant, but pretty smart.
yeah, he's got his whole family, and he's got a valuable worker.
Yeah.
And so he's going to,
Well, if
play
he's
into that.
Milk it.
recognizing, if he's recognizing or heard or believing that Jacob is the son of among the line of promise, then that even sweetens the deal, so to speak, for him. That he knows that God is going to bless him and bless everything that he touches, and so he's obviously seeing some of that and will. But at the same time, that is even more motivation for him to keep him around. And so one of the things that's interesting too, as we move into when these women, the 4 of them, start having children for Jacob, then I know.
Just glaze into that one. Isn't it?
Yeah. Then
The 4. Well, talk about two.
God he's showing his love for the underdog, so to speak, even in this, because Leah is the one, not only is she the one who bears children first, but she's also the one that has 6. Everybody else has just 2. Yeah. So, I mean, she's got half the kids to Jacob, whereas the other 3 combined now have 6.
Yeah.
And is she the one that has Dinah as well? I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, the only female that's listed as far as daughters, then, she's got that one as well. So,
Yeah, it was some strange times. We'll grant them that. And some of this was not kosher by any stretch of imagination, and yet God used it, and
Yeah.
so all things work together. And it really just points back to the faithfulness of God. That's all. Because man has never lived up to his side of anything. We just continue to drop the ball and do things that are just weird and wrong and wicked.
When things are happening that are completely against, at the very least, even if somebody could make an argument that this was not part of God's law back then, and so it was okay. Now, with everything that we see, we can say, and we can make a case, okay, this is what God has said. This is marriage is one man, one woman for life. We even look to what are the qualifications for leaders and stuff. And we say, okay, well, they have to be a husband of one woman. Within all of this, we understand what God's law is now, that what we're seeing back here is that when God is, even though God can bless in spite of our sin, that's kind of like the Paul thing of, shall we go on sinning so that grace may abound?
That's
and
right.
the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
And so the point within all of this, I guess, in my mind is, no matter how we see what is happening here, we still need to see and recognize God is faithful. God is the one who is good. And yes, on the other hand, we could see the flip side and say, look how much is messed up
Yeah.
when we do it the wrong way.
Yeah, it's
Right.
amazing that, if God didn't work with broken pieces, he'd have none, would he?
Yeah.
But I also come back to Paul in the fact that, when Israel rejected their Messiah, right? He said if the rejection has turned about for salvation of the entire world, what would his acceptance have been? And so I do believe that even still, while God is able to make chicken soup from chicken poop, the reality is we still are hindering is as far as it could be better. Our experience, I believe,
Yes.
could be better. And, God's going to do what God's going to do. But as far as how wonderful it is in our journey in this life, we have a factor in that. And so we see that whenever we mess up, there's consequences. And it doesn't thwart the sovereignty of God, but it does affect the pleasure of our journey in this life.
Yeah, well, and I think that goes back to what you often say in terms of, we can choose our sin, but we can't choose our consequences. And, we don't know, for that matter, if we're going to take a gamble, we don't know whether God is going to turn things around in this life
Yeah, that's
for
right.
us.
Yeah.
So even though we can look at all this and be like, oh, well, it worked out for them, worked out for them, we're not guaranteed that that's the case,
and,
right?
we could say it worked out, but, we also see a lot of tension. We see
Yes.
a lot of problems here. Even Jacob, him and Rachel aren't getting along. Why? Because she blames him that she has no children. I'm like, well, that's odd.
Yeah, and he's like, am I in the place of God?
Yeah, right. It's like
you can just hear the tone behind
and obviously with Leah getting pregnant like every night, it's he can point and say it ain't me. There's turmoil in that relationship, and
Oh, yeah.
again, all of this comes back to selfish ambitions, which is typically the root of the cause of when we go outside of God's plan and try to do it our own way because we want what we want, and it's a lack of faith, and it gets us in trouble.
So the second half, we get into Jacob's prosperity. He's wanting to go away is basically the whole idea. So, when God has blessed and he's given him all these children and they expand and all that type of stuff, then it's the same type of thing with Abraham and Lot. It's like, we've been so blessed that the land really can't sustain us, so let me go. You've been blessed, I've been blessed, so just free me, basically. Let me go. I've worked hard. And we get into the whole, changing the wages 10 times in chapter 31 and stuff. So let's just talk through that a little bit. We're seeing some of the conniving of everyone involved, basically. Still.
Yeah. Laban might have met his match.
Yeah.
Well, only because God's involved.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think he would have. God obviously is blessing Jacob because God chose to, not because Jacob deserves it. Again, we keep coming back to that. This guy, a little bit of a tool, but, he's God's tool.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's the same for all of us.
There's your next sermon title.
It
Tool
says,
or God's tool.
it says that Jacob desired to leave, and then in chapter 31, it starts with the Lord saying you have to leave.
Yeah.
And so I believe that the whole time it was the Lord's desire
That's
for
right.
Jacob to leave, and so the Lord's involved. It's going to work out.
Well, and Jacob for sure thought that he had figured something out by putting the strip branches in front of the watering trough and making the animals come out spotted if they're supposed to be spotted. And so he was working his angles that he thought he was working. Did that work? Did it not work? The reality is nothing works as good as God making it work. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so God was blessing him. And whether this particular procedure had anything to do with it or not, we could debate. But the reality is that, if God wants you to be blessed, you'll be blessed. We'll come back to Joseph here in a minute, but we see that over and over.
Well, I was thinking that, at least in my mind, God had given him, God had kind of given Jacob that insight to say,
Maybe.
if you do this, then this is what you'll get. I can't remember exactly where that is and if it was explicit or not. I'm blanking right
At
now.
31, we start seeing the relationship disintegrate because Jacob is becoming very wealthy, and Laban probably has stagnated at this point. And it's like, okay, Jacob's stuff is expanding, and mine just doing all right. And so that the people are greedy, people are jealous, and money matters more to most, if you want another sermon title. And so we see the greed, the jealousy here, and it destroys families. And we don't have to look at the Bible to see this. We see this in real life. This is what destroys families. Care so much about what I've got and what you've got. And
Well, yeah, and because of the discord, Jacob's like, well, we got to leave secretly because I don't want Laban to find out because he'll come after me.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he came after him.
And he's like, why didn't you let me say goodbye? I would have sent you off with happiness.
Oh,
I
yeah,
would've
sure you would
played-
have.
yeah.
Right.
Right,
That's
right.
who you've been. And would have done him harm, obviously, except God spoke to Laban in the night and said, hey, don't do it.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah, don't speak blessing or cursing.
Again, God's protecting Jacob. It tells us in verse 38 that he'd been with Laban for 20 years. And so Jacob's got to at least be 60 years old at this point. Been a tough 20 years, he said. Basically been terrible. And I'm happy to be done with you. And this is where we get the word Mizpah from in the Hebrew. May God watch over us while we're apart. And it's funny to me because for a long time they'd have this on necklaces. It'd be a heart that's got two pieces. And
Oh, yeah.
one of those separate chains that says Mizpah.
Yeah.
May God watch over us while we're apart. Like,
Take it out of context a little
you
bit.
know what that means? So that we don't kill each other when we're together, right?
Yeah. I will not cross past this
Right,
point
yeah.
to do you harm,
To do you
and
harm,
you
yeah, this
don't
is-
pass that part.
God protect me from you is what it's saying, not like, so way out of context. Somebody saw a word and just ran with it. I was like, oh my goodness.
Essentially, yeah, what we see, one of the things that I wrote down is, only God has protected me, otherwise I'd have nothing, is kind of the way that Jacob is seeing himself too. So I think he's recognizing what God is doing. And it was 31:10 following that, as far as like, God has taken away the livestock of your father, given them to me in the breeding season of the flock. I lifted up my eyes, saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and molted. And so that's the idea that God has kind of revealed it to him, perhaps, as far as, so God is working things again to bless Jacob and to give him what he needs.
32, he's preparing to meet Esau, again, first time in 20 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
He's like,
Well,
oh,
and
man.
He's nervous.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Rightfully.
I wonder why.
Yeah. I think why God comes and wrestles him is it goes along with this because God had said, I will be with you. And, when he hears that he's going to be meeting Esau, he's like, oh man, I got to do something. And so he's doing it in his own strength, not relying on the Lord to protect him and be with him as he had said. So the Lord comes and wrestles him in the night. And it's like this beautiful picture of an argument, even though it literally happened in wrestling. And so God dislocates his hip, proving to Jacob that you're not going to be able to do this in your own strength.
Yeah,
And
he's
so-
walking with a limp when he comes
Yeah.
to Esau, yeah.
And so he's already down and out for the count. So if Esau was going to do anything, he could have done it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His strength has definitely
Well,
failed at this point.
Yeah.
And the first thing that's mentioned, right, is that he's got 400 men with him, Esau.
Yeah, he's
Doesn't look good when
Yeah.
Jacob is looking at it and he's like, yeah, this seems like it's going to
400
be
feels
all
like
right.
a lot.
yeah, all he's got is his family. And,
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this also comes back to the point that, while Jacob's got the birthright and stole the blessing, yet Esau is a very wealthy man. He's
Right.
not lacked for anything. And so he stayed. And so I'm sure most of everything Esau had, Isaac had, has become his now. And some of it's almost semantics to the point where he's every bit as blessed as Jacob, just he doesn't have the promise that the
Yeah.
covenant. that
Right.
Well,
was
and
gonna run
again,
through him.
I mean, and God told that ahead of time.
Yes,
He
he
spoke that ahead of time, and it was said that he was going to have 12 princes that were going to come from him, 12 tribes. And so type idea as well, in the same way that Jacob has 12.
So here he is just praying God would show him mercy with Esau. Like, man, if you can just make this work out for me, I'll worship you. You don't even know. I'll go to church. I'll go to Sunday school. And so I kind of wrote at the heading of that. He left a deceiver, came back a believer.
As far as the wrestling,
some of
Yeah.
that where it's he is asking God for help instead of just
Yeah.
trying to do it on his own or with his deceptions. He recognizes that his abilities are limited and he needs God.
again, one of the things that Tiana was mentioning too when we were talking about it was before this, keep mixing up these names. I'll get it right at some point. Jacob was kind of referring to God as the God of Abraham or my fathers or something like that. Whereas after he's wrestling, then he kind of makes it more personal. And so it's kind of like Jacob also becoming, God is more of a personal thing to him. We see God reiterating this covenant that he's making with
Right.
Jacob. And so that wrestling, I think, God, yes, he has engaged Jacob many times up to this point, but now it's Jacob finally perhaps giving in and saying, okay, uncle, he's crying mercy. And, that hip is going to be that constant reminder for him.
Right.
Esau's living in the mountainous area of Seir. Jacob.
Interesting.
Yep, it is, isn't it?
Yep.
And Jacob ends up settling in Shechem. Enter Dinah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, tough story. So most of the point, I think, of chapter 34 is to show us exactly what kind of men these were that are going to become the tribes of Israel. And they were not great at the moment.
Yeah, it definitely comes into play as far as this is probably what Jacob is referring to when he says, Simeon and Levi, you guys are the ones that are bloody. You
Yeah.
got blood on your hands. Covenant's not coming through you. You guys are vengeful, so cursed be your anger.
Yeah, that's right.
And so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because we look at it through our eyes and we're like, well, this is like, they just served justice and they were mad about it, right? And it seems like this is fine. Well, maybe we would say it's a little bit extreme as far as killing all of them.
Yeah, I would kill Shechem. I mean,
Yeah.
if they killed him, I'm like, all right, I can get behind that.
Yeah. But,
Everybody?
yeah. And so we would look at that and we'd be like, okay, well, they took it too far. Yes, it's vengeful. Yes, it's retaliatory. And now, as Jacob says, he's like, look at all this trouble you've brought upon us because of what you've done.
Well, and that's motivated by greed, too. They go in
Yeah.
and they just take all their stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder if that was part of, I don't know if that was like a secondary thing or a primary motivator. I'm not sure.
Hey, if we kill them all, we can get everything. 'Cause you can't.
Yeah.
Seems like it would all fit together.
It was definitely premeditated in terms of the circumcision, knowing that they're like,
Way
we're going to get them all.
premeditated. It was brilliantly premeditated.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, they won't be able to do anything. Just sit there and take a sword in the head.
Yeah, it does show just the depravity of man, for one thing. We can see that. It shows the background of who these, the 12 tribes, like you mentioned, are. It goes to show, just how much hurt and sin and awfulness there was in this time.
So God tells him to leave and go to Bethel. They gave Jacob all their foreign gods, and so this is where he buried them. And so he's like, hey, look, we're going up to Bethel, leave all this junk behind.
It's in 35 that Jacob's name is officially changed. At least it was mentioned in the wrestling with God, but now it's kind of like, no longer shall you be known as this, but now
I see
Israel
it.
in verse 10.
Yeah, it's like another confirmation of the covenant there. 'Cause God has changed,
Yeah.
just like Abraham, from Abram to Abraham.
Yeah, and the command is given too. It's we're seeing this not only the reiterating of the covenant, but also the command: be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Nations are going to come from you, and kings, and I'm going to give you a land of promise. And so that's big and important. And one of the reasons why Jacob has to leave Laban is kind of say, you're going back to the land that I promised to you guys, and to your descendants.
So Rachel died on the way to Bethel.
Yeah, and you got to wonder how much that messed up Jacob,
Yeah.
because clearly within all of their turmoil and stuff, she was the one that he desired,
Yeah.
wanted and wasn't fooled and tricked by or whatever in order to get her and stuff. And obviously Joseph being his favorite son, and then Benjamin, this was all kind of playing into that. And it's just sad. I think when we look at it and later on, she's not buried with the rest of them.
That's right.
And even just that fact that she was not buried with Leah,
Yeah.
and then Abraham and Sarah and Isaac.
Yeah, there's nothing but sad and all that. And I think this is the beginning of his sorrows. Obviously, he tells Pharaoh, hey, look, it's been a few years and they've been sorrowful.
Yeah.
He lost his wife, and then he lost, his son for quite a while.
Yeah.
That thought he was dead, and so he grieved that. And then, famine. And he had a rough go, even though he's been definitely blessed.
Mm-hmm.
There's some emotional sorrow there that he's had to deal with for sure.
I'm trying to remember. So Rachel named Benjamin Ben-Oni, which means son of suffering, and Jacob changed it to Benjamin, and I can't remember.
Son
what
of
that-
my right hand.
Yeah, that's right. Which is not directly opposite, but is a much happier name.
It's interesting in 27 that Isaac's still alive. Jacob came back to his father Isaac in memory. Isaac lived to be 180 years old.
Yeah, and so Jacob has lost, at least as it's written here, he's lost his wife, his favored wife, his father, and then as things fast forward, and we have Joseph at this point, and he's start dreaming, and they sell him, and all that type of stuff. Then he's basically lost everything, and so it is no wonder why he's like, you know what, I don't really have much to live for. My son's gone, and so there's Benjamin, but at the same time, he's holding so tightly to the things that he's trying to control, I guess, is kind of the idea there. But yet he knows that if this one last thing was taken over and he gave it up, so to speak, or released it, he's so afraid of that because he's like, then I would utterly have nothing.
Well, and his sons seem to agree with him.
Yeah.
When they tell Joseph, hey, if we come back without him, our father's going to die.
Yeah.
This will be it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I actually grieve him to death.
So just to kind of breeze through a few things. In chapter 36, we've got Esau's descendants. It just kind of shows that, yes, God is blessing Esau as well, even though he's not the son that has the line that will come, the Messiah. And so then we find in 37, Jacob is in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan, and this is where Joseph kind of comes into play. So Isaac has passed away. Jacob is still around. The story kind of takes on a turn as far as now it follows Joseph, which, interesting enough, perhaps this is one of the things that needs to play into. Obviously, the biggest reason why we see that Joseph and the recording of Joseph and everything was because this is how God saved the Israelite people. But along with that, Joseph is not the one whose line is going to be blessed with the Messiah. Okay. And so typically we're seeing, the people that are mentioned and the people that were followed. We have side notes for these other people, but typically it's just the son of promise, whichever one has the son of promise type thing. And yet Joseph is kind of a side in that sense. But anyway, so he's a dreamer. His brothers, when we get to the point where he's sent out to his brothers, you're like, here comes that dreamer.
Well, and even prior to that, Scripture recognizes that Israel, Jacob loved Joseph more than all of his other sons.
Yep.
And when you do that, you're definitely putting together a recipe for problems. And we've seen it with Isaac. We saw it with Rebekah. It's like, this is not how families work well. This is how they dysfunction with an unction. And so, obviously, because of who his mother was, there was a special bond there. And I don't know what to say to it, but other than that, Scripture recognizes it, that it was real. It wasn't just perception.
Yeah.
He actually did love Joseph more.
And this pattern is really nothing new in terms of all the different brothers. I mean, basically every generation there's brother against brother.
Yeah.
And so this is just carrying through within all of that too.
You see some youthful exuberance here when it comes to his telling of his dreams. Dude's not able to read a room.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, let me tell you what I dreamed. Like, probably better don't. It's like they already don't care much for you, and you're just stacking it on now. Like,
so within the retelling of the dreams, when he gets to the one where the sun and the moon and the stars bow down, then, a couple things. One is 11 stars are mentioned. So at this point, this kind of leads us to believe that Joseph at least had seen Benjamin before he takes off to Egypt. Well, take off is kind of the wrong way to put it, but before he's dragged away to Egypt, he probably knows about Benjamin at least. Along with that, the response, they were all basically hating him for that. And even Jacob is like, you think I'm going to bow down to you, like even you and your mother? But at the same time, it also says that he kept these things in mind. And some of that may have been because there was a prophecy given to him in terms of that, may your mother's sons bow down to you type idea as far as Jacob. And so anyway, maybe he was thinking about that.
But Reuben is the one, firstborn, the responsible one, except for, he made a huge blunder along the way. Right. But we'll get to that. But he is the one that is trying to rescue Joseph from his brothers, recognizing that, at least a number of them, if not the majority, would like to just kill him. And here's what's amazing. To kill him is not a huge deal to them. I'm just telling you, it points back to just the character of these guys. To kill somebody, if you're so easily going to kill your brother, then you got to know everybody else in the world is like lightweight, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
It's like, we just kill him.
It goes to the extent of their hate for him too. Yeah. Like, just in terms of they really, really, really couldn't stand to be around him. And so, yes, killing him, that would solve all their problems.
But I think they're violent people.
Yeah.
And, probably in that culture, a lot of people were violent people. But I think these guys were extra. And so whenever they're traveling, after they...
At least Simeon and Levi.
After they had murdered an entire town, nobody... The fear came up from that God put on them, right?
Yeah.
But also, reality is like, do you really want to mess with these guys? It's like, if we attack them, it might not work out.
Yeah. I see too their carelessness and the fact that they're not thinking about how it's going to make their father feel. Because if this was his favorite son, like they understand that Jacob loved Joseph more than them, it's not going to make him love them more.
Right.
And they're not thinking about that. No. So now they're just going to grieve their father, and he ends up being grieved either way. But
yeah. So he's sold. I think it's Judah that convinces them, right? So
verse
he's like,
26.
"Hey, let's make a profit at the same time. We can be rid of him and make a profit." And so they're like, "Yeah, that sounds good." So they do. And then Reuben comes back to discover that he's no longer in the pit, and that's when Reuben is kind of tearing his clothes, and he's like, "What in the world did you guys do?" So yeah, Reuben not only tries to fight for him, but he's also distraught over the fact that something has happened to Joseph. But they all take his robe and they kill a goat, dipped his robe in the blood so that they can go back and be like, "Hey, can you identify this?" And of course they know that he's going to identify it, and so of course that sends Jacob into mourning, tearing his garments and everything.
This lying is hereditary.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't skip a single generation, has it? Like, let's just deceive somebody. Let's deceive a lot of people.
And when you guys were talking about the favorite and how much grief it's going to cause, I mean, we see that when in verse 35, all his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted.
Yeah.
He says, "Nope, I'm going to go down to Sheol to my son in mourning. I'm going to mourn basically for the rest of my life."
Yeah. Which seems maybe we would judge that as overly emotional, but I think there's some things in this life that there's not a lot of recovery from.
Yeah, well, and definitely I think, in his mind, he's like, it's at least a way to say, I'm never going to get past this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm never going to get over it.
And, I believe there's some degree of that that's reasonable.
Yeah.
And I've thought about grief a lot, with your situation and others as well. It's like, what is the right response? What does healing look like? And I don't always know, man, as far as like what's the arrival point where it's like, okay, you don't get over it, you just learn to live with it.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't get over stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like it doesn't exist. And then it's not even like it doesn't affect you every day. It's going to be a daily thing. It's like, it's going to prey on your mind a little bit. And so it's becomes almost the elephant in the room, and something triggers it, and it's going to be like that for, I think, a lifetime. And I'm sure he went through this. It's like, he'd see something or hear something or think something, and it would come back, and he just learned to live with it.
Yeah. Well, and even just the fact that he's like, surely he was torn apart by a fierce animal type thing. I can only imagine too that he's got that in the back of his mind. Well, what if?
Yeah.
What if he wasn't actually killed?
Yeah.
Is there
It says
hope that
something
I'm going to
later,
see
right?
him again? Yeah. Is this just a nightmare that I'm going to wake up from at some point?
Yeah. And that would almost be worse.
Yeah.
Nobody ever covers what happens next, but he left and went looking. This is not, he didn't just sit down and spend the rest of his life in his bedroom. I'm sure he made an effort to go out and try to find his son or his remains. That we all would have. And so nobody covers the fact that he probably spent weeks, if not months, covering the hillsides of that country trying to find some semblance of his son. And just what a sad story that would have been.
Chapter 38, it seems like an interruption because we just got introduced to Joseph, and yet after chapter 38, then we go right back to Joseph. Let's talk through 38 and why it's there and what the big deal is. So who wants to take it?
Well, the big deal is this is, again, following the line of Christ.
Yes.
Which is amazing, right? We say like one of the worst human examples possible, and yet it's the chosen lineage that God's going to use that Messiah is going to come from. So that's the big deal. That's why we have the story, obviously. But there's other things we can find here.
Just to kind of reiterate it as far as play it out, Judah, he left his brothers, basically. He turned aside to a certain Edolamite. Then he takes the daughter of a certain Canaanite who was named Shua. Took her, went into her. She conceived, bore a son. His name is then Onan, and then Shelah. And so it's kind of the same type of thing, too, where these guys are seeing these women and they're like, hey, she looks good. I like her. She's mine. Yeah. And they're just kind of laying claim. So she bears 3 different sons. And so his firstborn, takes Tamar to be his wife, and God kills and then it goes to Onan. So there's basically, I can't remember the word for it, but basically there's this established rule that the brother-in-law, if the older brother did not have an heir, then the brother-in-law was supposed to step in and marry that woman and then give an heir to the older brother. And so in a sense, it's this idea that Onan, that son, would not really be claimed as Onan's. It would actually be claimed as, in this case, Sson and his descendant. And so he would be the patriarch, so to speak, in this line. And so
right. Well, and that carried over into the Mosaic Law too, because when a Jewish husband dies, his wife goes to his brother, and so
without children.
Right. Yep.
Makes for some interesting times now, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, bud, we're going to talk about this person you're about to marry.
I'll be like, I am so glad I don't have a brother.
Yeah.
I think Haley would just want to die. Yeah. She'd be like, no, I'm not going to him.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
We don't live under that law, so praise God.
It is
Yeah.
a blessing.
So the first one dies. Second one does not want to fulfill the custom, and
That's
so
the
God
PG
kills
way,
him
yes.
too.
Right.
And so he's somewhat selfish and
Yeah.
hateful and all that. I mean, it's not like it was going to cost him a ton, right? Just he's have to help raise a child, but I don't know. It's,
Yeah, the only thing that we can kind of factor within this is the fact that he was like, well, if I'm the next in line,
Yeah.
then I become the heir, and my
right.
son becomes the heir.
Yeah.
And so
I get the greater inheritance,
Yeah.
and so I don't have to
Right.
split it with this kid,
Yeah.
which is what would happen. The child then would be basically equals with him, and so he'd split the inheritance 3 ways. Two, maybe he's thinking that. Anyway, God kills him, leaves last man standing, basically.
Yeah. And so Judah's a little bit afraid. He's like,
Yeah.
okay, I see the pattern here.
Yeah. And without the story, he don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe it's her. You got to be thinking maybe it's Tamar. Maybe
Well,
she's cursed.
yeah. So Judah just kind of holds her there in his household, and as
Perpetual
Sheila-
mourning, yeah.
As Sheila comes to age, he doesn't give her to him.
But
So-
he sends her to mourn into her father's household, right?
Oh, is that what it says? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, Sheila never comes for her.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so she finds out that Judah is going down to shear the sheep, or to the sheep shearers, and clearly there's a little bit between the lines that we're reading into, as far as saying, okay, well, this must have been a customary practice or a typical thing that Judah, it was not seen as a very what in the world type of thing when Judah goes looking for a prostitute, essentially. And so she's taking off her widow's garments, presenting herself as a prostitute. And so he says, hey, can I come into you type thing? And she's like, well, yeah, but what are you going to give me? He says that there's a pledge. Here's the pledge, my ring, my cord, my signet, or my staff. And so she's accepting that until he can give her a goat, basically. But it's really not about that. She doesn't really care about the goat, of course. So
again, there's a veil that she wore during all this.
yes.
Which again, there's customs that we still are not familiar with in regards to the whole Leah thing, and now this prostitute wore a veil where I guess he didn't see her face.
Yeah.
But,
I wonder if it was truly a prostitute type of scenario, then maybe he didn't care to.
I mean, if you were not,
He wasn't there for a relationship.
Right.
As it comes, then obviously she gets pregnant, and that'll come in a couple more verses. But when he goes to give the goat, the woman, the prostitute, the temple prostitute, is basically how it's put. Where is she? She can't be found. He goes looking further, can't be found. And then it kind of jumps forward to say, then Judah finds out, hey, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, she's been immoral. In fact, she's pregnant. And so he's like, all right, we know what to do with this woman.
Bring her out, let her
Bring
be
her out.
burned.
Yeah. Bring her out. We're going to burn her.
well, it actually says my verse says she had turned to prostitution and has become pregnant.
Okay.
Did y'all
Yeah.
say morals? Or what
It says immoral, yeah.
Okay.
I got the same one as you. So.
Oh, all right, yeah.
But that's kind of the rumor, basically, at the very least.
What's
That's-
amazing to me is like, oh, burn her. She's a prostitute, but you can go be with a prostitute and nothing.
Exactly.
And I was like, well, that's talking about double standard.
Yeah. And he admits it.
wild.
Yeah,
It is
and
wild.
he does admit it, as far as the double standard, he's like in verse 26, she's more righteous than I. So when
Yeah.
the signet ring was brought out, when the staff was brought out, when the cord was brought out, then he's like, I do recognize that.
Yes.
Like,
And
oh.
clearly my sin has found me out. And so he's like, surely she is more righteous than I am. And so that's kind of
Yeah.
in a sense where it's left. She has twins. One is Perez, which is the line that Christ comes through, and then Zerah. And so is this the cord, which is interesting too. This is another time where the technically firstborn is not really the one that is the line, if I remember.
Yeah, I took note of, I feel like Judah realizes his wrongdoing in a couple ways. One, with prostitution and taking her. And two, he didn't do what he had promised, which was give his son Sheila to her. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I guess he kind of sees it as the reason that you did this is because I didn't give my son to you.
Yep.
So,
It comes to the question, why in the world are we even seeing this?
Yeah.
well,
Why
because
was it recorded?
Well, it's-
Just
Tamar is listed in the genealogy of Christ.
yeah,
That's right.
just making sure everybody is aware of that and knows that. So we're seeing that Judah, what type of person he is, but also because he is the one that is going to be receiving the blessing, saying that the scepter will not pass from you until the one who's rightful owner of it, basically.
Yeah.
And so as we're seeing that, then Moses is including this to say, hey, look, this is what happens, and this is where we get Perez even. We're seeing the line of Christ, and it's definitely, the line is dirty, if you want to put it that way.
Well, it ain't done getting dirty.
Yeah, I know.
It was like maybe the dirtiest, right?
Yeah.
This is not the last prostitute either going to be in there.
we come back to Joseph, and Joseph finds himself in the house of Potiphar, which I don't know if you guys have ever run across this, but I found out that this means chief slaughterer.
Well, I mean, it says that he is the commander of the guard, so
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah. Because Moses is, it's mentioned within Moses' story too. I can't remember who it was, but it also translates to chief slaughterer. We all know the story. We won't take the time to reiterate it because we are running long. So what do we want to highlight within Joseph's whole thing up until his brothers come to him? So is there anything that we want to highlight?
I mean, the story itself just screams sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you can't see it here, then you can't see it anywhere.
Yeah.
So much bad turns into so much good because God's in control.
Yeah.
It's at any one point in time, you take a snapshot, you think, well, this is the worst story ever. But only whenever you put the pieces all together, you realize, okay, this is a perfect puzzle. God was putting it together to make it what it is. Yeah, some people did him wrong, meant evil against him. It didn't work out well. He suffered some, yes. But all the while, God was putting into place something amazing, something bigger than him. And so I think our takeaway for it is we got to realize that what God is doing in us and through us is bigger than us.
Yeah.
And so if we're not okay with that, then we might not be okay with our story, right? But if we can be okay with that God is using us to paint something that's bigger than us and we're just a piece of the puzzle, then it becomes more palatable. I guess even the hard stuff becomes more palatable to realize, okay, it's not about my pleasure. This life, God is using me because he's doing something bigger than me.
Yeah.
And am I willing to be used even in a way that perhaps sometimes feels like suffering? Then the answer by faith is yes, because it's not about me. And it's we have to come back to that, I think, continually, because that is not our natural position. Our natural position is no, it is about me.
Yeah. Constantly. We're
Right. And
very self-centered.
So when I read the story of Joseph, it's a great reminder for me that, hey, God is doing something with my life that's bigger than my life. And so I can't just be focused on my pleasure today or what's wrong today. I got to recognize that, hey, this is just a moment. This is just a snapshot.
Yeah. I would point out too that, in contrast to his brothers, he seems to be walking in line with the Lord. And so he upholds the standard that he understands that God has placed. And especially when it comes to Potiphar's wife, he's like, no, I can't take someone else's wife. That's not right. And so,
Well, and he even says, I would sin against God.
Right.
So he's recognizing.
yeah, so he knows, what God says and what his rules are and his character. And so he's demonstrating that in a beautiful way, yet he still suffers. And I kind of see that as, you can look at Joseph as like a type of Christ where he, is righteous, but is suffering for it. And yet he still comes to save his people.
When Peter says, hey, look, if you suffer for doing what's right, there's a blessing in that.
Yeah.
But if you suffer for doing what's wrong, then there's no benefit in that.
Yeah. It's like, well, yeah, of course it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right.
So, when you asked earlier, why do we spend so much time looking at the story of Joseph? I think it's because, we're looking at someone who did it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, end up being blessed for it. And the whole family, all of Israel became blessed because of it.
Yeah. And I think that it's also big, thing to point out is verse 3. He says, the master, whoever was in charge of, so whether it's Potiphar or somebody else, saw that the Lord was with Joseph, that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed with his hands or in his hands. And so he found favor. And so just that whole idea that the Lord was with him in all of this. And so God did not always protect him from the negative effects of other people. And so he's thrown into prison, because he was framed. And even when they forgot him and he had to stay longer in prison and so many other things that happened to Joseph, even not to mention, how he got to Egypt in the first place, that the Lord was with Joseph. And I think that that's probably part of, if we want to read into it, to say these things, Joseph had to turn to God. I mean, he's in a foreign land. He doesn't know the language, probably, completely different customs. He's got a lot of hardship. And so the Lord being with him was his blessing, but also I think that's part of what taught him too, as far as he constantly had to rely on God, and that taught him in terms of dependence on God. And so I think that also plays into the integrity. How do we have integrity? Well, we've got to be able to see the bigger picture.
That's it.
So he's like, well, I can have this moment of pleasure, let's say, but I'm not going to do that because it would be a great wickedness against God. That's what's so huge.
Well, and listen, too, it's just to put a knock on Potiphar's wife here. If she's that bold, this ain't her first rodeo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is like, there's a part of me is like, man, does this guy really think that this is who Joseph is? Or is he just, avoiding the embarrassment of admitting that's who his wife is? I don't know.
Well, and I guess I just tend to assume, and maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, that in this particular realm, that these things, that's just the custom, just what happens. Like,
seems to me if he'd really,
Pharaoh's probably doing the same thing.
if he really believed that this is how it went down, according to her words, that Joseph would have died. I feel like maybe he wasn't completely convinced.
Yeah. I think you're right, because he had to do something because,
Right.
this is his wife and
Protect her
he's got
honor,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Not that she
type of
had
thing.
any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the charades.
Well, anyway, I mean, it got Joseph away from her anyway, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's some protection there.
Yeah, God definitely protects him. And so, we've got the interpretation of the dreams. We see that as far as, the cupbearer is restored, the baker is killed. Eventually, when Pharaoh starts having dreams, then the cupbearer has, I remember a guy. Your magicians and your divination.
And they
people
were real.
can
They
do it.
came
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. So how about we go to him? And so, within all of that, then clearly when Joseph is interpreting the dreams and he's saying 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, great famine that will make the 7 years of plenty look like it'll basically wipe out all the surplus. And he says, here's what you need to do. Then Pharaoh is like, hey, you know what? You are the guy to make this happen. And so that's what we get to. And that's where we get to the fact that when Joseph's family comes to him in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine, as God has been sovereign over all of it, the famine drives them to him. And
Well,
so-
in each of these situations where Joseph is interpreting dreams, he's consistent to make sure that God gets the credit for it, even
Yeah.
though in his situation it would have, human wisdom would have said, no, you're going to need this win. you need this to go on your account, man. They need to think that you are something in order to promote you out of the situation you're in. And yet he doesn't do it. Each time it's like, no, God gives the interpretation. It's not me. And so he's the one that's powerful. It's not me.
yeah.
And so God honors that. If we will humble ourselves, God will exalt us. And if we exalt ourselves, then God has to humble us.
Which is funny because that you mentioned that, because he plays it a different way when it comes to the cup. He's like, don't you know this is the cup by which I practice divination?
Yeah, well, he's just messing with them.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. It's like when he's trying to fool his brothers and stuff and play it up, and he certainly does play it up.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely was playing his part there.
Yeah.
Like, you ain't practicing no divination. Shoot.
As it's going, then Joseph and his brothers come in. He's got to test them. He's like, I got to know whether you guys have changed, essentially. And perhaps that was only because he wanted to know. I don't really see other positives from that necessarily. It was just kind of the way Joseph, he wanted to know whether his father was good, whether Benjamin was good, whether his brothers had changed, and all of that. But God, he knew that they were coming, and they even, if they were putting pieces together, then they would have known even way back when, that God had prophesied that they would be coming to Egypt and that they would be there for 400 years, and then they'd be restored and stuff. But I don't know if they're putting those pieces together, but at least it was prophesied beforehand.
It's also just of no value whatsoever. Joseph's about 40 years old when all this happens.
Wow, you are
I
just
couldn't do
really
the math
on
on
it.
that.
And so for whatever reason, I am attracted to that type of timeline stuff. It's like, I'm going to figure out what the age was right here. Just why? Because I just want to know. That's it. I got no, if it's ever on Jeopardy, maybe I'll win something. But otherwise, I can't tell you why that
it
matters.
was 30 when he was
Yeah,
put
give him a
into-
signet ring.
Yeah. And so we had 7 good years, and then we know it was 2 bad years before they basically ran out of food. So it
Right.
could have been 39, somewhere around 39 or
Yeah.
40.
Yeah.
And during that time, he had 2 sons by an Egyptian woman. So
Yeah.
let's just fast forward. Basically, the back and forth. Joseph says you can't come back unless you bring Benjamin. Obviously, Jacob doesn't want that to happen. He's like, no, I've got to hold on. Like we mentioned before, I've got to hold on. I got to hold on. If you take him and something happens to him, then I'm just going to literally die. And so through some convincing, then it finally does. I mean, they've got no other option. Basically, he's going to die anyway. All his
Yeah.
people are going to die. And so he does eventually let Benjamin go. And so Joseph is playing these tricks, basically saying, put the cup in the sack.
There's a
and
little bit of comedy in this.
There is. Yeah,
It's,
I'm sure there is.
Jacob says, hey, look, you can't take Benjamin because if something happens to him, I will be so upset. Now, you 10 can go ahead.
Yeah.
I was like, what's that mean? I was like, how are we supposed to feel about that?
we thought we got rid of this Joseph guy and got rid of all those problems. But
Yeah, just it's just kind of humorous when I read it. You got to think, what's he? What must be?
chopped liver.
I guess we don't. If something happened to us, you ain't gonna be so sad about that. Maybe he just felt they could better capable of taking care of themselves. But again, Benjamin also has to be 30 years old at this point. It's not like he's a child.
Well, yeah, because when
Right.
they come, then his sons are listed as well, as
Yeah.
far as among the people that come.
That's right.
eventually it comes to be that Joseph reveals himself, and this is where we start seeing that he's saying all along, this is what God has provided. He sent me ahead of you. And so he's not even saying that this is like, I am the deal. It's just that I've gone before you so that God can save a great many people.
Right.
And what you guys meant for evil, God intended for good type thing. When we come to chapter 50, I think it is. Yeah, I mean, this is what's happening here. And the Joseph, I don't know exactly where you may be going with it Sunday, but we'll deal with Joseph some more within all of that.
I do have some stuff planned. I'll point out too that Judah was the one that offered himself in the place of Benjamin. So you just kind of get to see some maturity. People change. They melt as they get older. There's a depth there where he now cares a lot about his father.
Yeah, Reuben volunteered first.
He did, but
he didn't accept it. But then when Judah did, he did accept it.
Right. And Judah obviously makes a really heartfelt claim here. And even Reuben back at the house before they left, he's like, hey, look, if I don't come back with him, you can kill my boys.
Yeah, your sons.
That's weird, but he knows that ain't going to happen, right? Nobody's going to take that. But he's just trying to put himself up also as a pledge. But for sure, Judah does, and it's heartfelt. You can see this, that, hey, I'll stay here and be your slave and send him home. And so he chooses his father over himself there, which is, again, obviously different than who they used to be back when they had a guy hiding in a hole.
Yeah. Well, and also, as Jacob passes, the brothers are worried about Joseph. And so they're like, well, he's going to, now he can seek revenge on us. But, Joseph this is when he goes into, what you guys meant for evil, God meant it for good. I see that as a beautiful picture of reconciliation as well.
Yeah, and it shows true forgiveness, and it's definitely, in the same way that Joseph has been this demonstration of integrity and stuff, it also shows that in the type of Christ that God is seeking reconciliation, he's seeking forgiveness as opposed to retaliation, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to slaughter you guys now that Dad's gone, then, there's nothing holding me back. And so here we go.
Like, remember me?
Yeah.
Right.
So,
but yeah, that was never...
Back to that special set of skills, right?
Yeah. I don't have a lot of money. Yeah. That's hilarious. At 49, chapter 49 is just, it's pretty miraculous. I love prophecy anyway, but to hear it so clear as far as verse 10 is concerned, Jacob was so aware of not just a Messiah, but that he was going to come from Judah.
Yeah.
Again, this is God-given, Spirit-infused. This is not something that Moses should have even known, really. It's not like it had been written down anywhere prior to this, and to our knowledge, and yet here we are, Jacob proclaiming it. Vivid detail. I mean, we just cut through a lot of noise right there. It's like, okay, we go track the line of Judah now.
Yeah.
Out of all of these 12.
And out of all the 12 within the blessings, there's not many that are actually that great.
Not so great.
So most of these boys are probably thinking, man, Dad, please, could have done better. Couldn't have said something better.
Yeah, and he's probably thinking, you guys could have been better.
Well, and that's kind of where my mind goes too, is like, how much of this is prophetic and how much of it is just playing off of who they are.
Yeah.
And as far as like, hey, I've seen this pattern in your life, and so here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Here's how I see this going down.
That's who you are.
And I do think that, some of it is prophetic because, who Jacob is and all, but anyway.
I like 49 so much. I think I'd like to do it as a reenactment one day.
Yeah.
I think we could put a shine on this thing, and I could turn it into something. And it would be, it's always, we've got a script here.
Yeah.
So it's like a little bit of memorization. We can pull this off. Just need about 12 other people to help me out.
Yeah. So clearly we can see, just to kind of wrap up, as the book of Genesis, we can see what God is doing, and through the thick and the thin and the depravity of man, it starts all the way in the beginning. Adam and Eve doing their own thing, and everybody keeps doing their own thing, but God is faithful, and God is going to fulfill the promise that he's given. He's going to bless the ones that he said he is going to bless. He is going to carry through the line. He's going to preserve the line, and we've seen this even to the point where there's a huge famine, and he's sent Joseph ahead in all those ways. So yeah, we can see what God is doing, and we can see that if we choose to do our own thing, it comes with a lot of consequences.
Yeah.
But if we trust God, then that is the better way of doing it.
Trust God's way is always beautiful. It's always righteous. It's always pleasant, and our way always messes it up.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, it could have been so great, except we had to get involved.
Yeah.
Had to do it our way for a minute, and not that, again, it doesn't circumvent the sovereignty of God. He's able to even work with our brokenness and our mess, but how much more beautiful from our perspective it would be if we just did it his way.
Mm-hmm.
So there it is.
Yep.
Live that life. It's happier.
Yeah.